Hello everyone and welcome once again to God Talk on Cambridge Community Access Television. Each week at this time we get together, we talk about God, we talk about faith, we talk about religion, spirituality, and we really talk about the essence of being, what it is to be a human being and to be as alive and as whole and as integrated and as true as we can. And I have, as I do so often, my good friend Michael Koran here on my right, wearing the orange shirt. And I have on my left, Michael Mack, who is hosting this show. And what we're going to talk about this week is a concept that I just heard about. I heard about it through this guy right here. A concept that came to him. Well, I'll let him talk about where it came from. But as I understand it, Michael, you learned about this concept fana, F-A-N-A. You learned about it through Sufi practice or Hindu practice.
I think from Sufi practice.
Sufi practice. Okay. I'll begin by saying that neither of us are experts on fana. Don't try this at home. But we are, being the God Talk guys, we are interested in discovering all paths to God. And so tell me and our viewing audience what fana is. F-A-N-A.
And we are only guessing here.
We're not experts.
Yes. I think it's annihilation.
Mm-hmm.
Meaning
annihilation of
your ego,
of the ego, of the self, of the old self, or the false self.
Yeah, or the smaller self, and then all of a sudden, I'm beginning to feel this. We can be really connected to and in touch with what's around us.
Now, here's a question. I mean, I heard this term from you, and did you hear it from the Sufi group that you meet with? Dances of Universal Peace, is that the name of the group?
I might have heard it reading about Rumi.
Reading about Rumi, okay.
Yes.
The Persian poet of, 1,200 years ago, something like that?
Around the
1,400
year
years?
1,200, yes.
1,100 to 1,200 A.D.
Yeah. Most popular poet in America.
Interesting factoid. Not sure I would need more evidence than simply you're telling me that.
We could bet.
We could bet.
Wow.
Most popular poet in America?
Meaning more books bought.
Yeah, we'll have to define exactly what most popular poet in America, because, are you sure you want to bet?
I think I might lose, but I'm happy to bet.
Okay. What we would have to figure, we're going to have to take this offline because we'll have to define terms, and that could get boring.
Okay.
But just getting back to the idea of fana, so it's about the annihilation of the self. And it actually, how is it different from jihad, which is also the, as I understand it, jihad is the, I don't have the language for it, but
the struggle with the self.
The struggle against the self, or the struggle to overcome the self.
Yeah.
The jihad in its purest form is about struggle. It's about struggle, and it's about overcoming victory over the self. And it has been perverted by some, but that as I understand it, is its original meaning. It's the struggle to overcome the self. So they seem similar to me. Now you use the word annihilation.
Yes.
Annihilation of the self. And the question that I had, because as we were talking a little bit earlier, you were saying something about that fana is about annihilating oneself. But what seems truer to me is that it would be more about allowing the self to be annihilated through the natural process of living.
That's beautiful.
The natural processes of life, because life will bring plenty of suffering.
And it might be ego rather than self. I don't know.
Okay. For this show, why don't we use them interchangeably? At least smaller self and ego. But we're presupposing that there is a larger self. There is a greater self. There is a God self, if you will.
I mean, many people can identify with your good angels and your
Okay.
bad angels,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Which is another topic you might have been you were interested
Yeah.
in.
Yeah. So let's begin. Why don't we just begin with what ego is? What do you think ego is?
Wow. See, we're chatting along, and now all of a sudden this huge question.
Deep. We're going deep. I have an answer if you're...
Yes.
The beginning of an answer, not the answer. I have the beginning of an answer. That the ego is that part of us that is in defense, that is defending
Wow.
itself.
Wow.
Defending itself against change, defending itself against its dislikes, defending itself against anything that could... I'm faltering here, so jump in at any moment. But but ego is all about defense, setting up defensive mechanisms in order to ensure its survival, ensure the survival
Yes.
of the ego, and the ego ultimately isn't even real.
Wow.
Which is why it's in defense. There's part of it that recognizes it's not real.
And when someone has a child,
Yeah?
I had a friend that just said, I would just die for my child. I'd lay down my life for my...
I believe that
My
many
son.
parents would do exactly that.
So that, then all of a sudden, one isn't just concerned with oneself. Another being, if you see the self as a force field, and then there's another being, it could be your husband, your child, all of a sudden your force field grows. And you're concerned, like love your neighbor as yourself.
Or going back to what may be the same gospel, or certainly one of the gospels, there is no greater love than this. Man hath no greater love than this, than to lay down his life for his friend. So, Jesus there prefiguring
What my
his own-
woman friend, about what he had to do. So I used to think that people who spoke about getting rid of your ego want your ego. Give me your money, give me your work.
It has been misused in that way. You know, people have misused the truth of that in that way. Because if we are going to become defenseless, which is what getting rid of the ego is, to become defenseless, to become childlike, except as you become a little child, you shall not see the kingdom of heaven.
Wow, scary.
If we lose that ego, we lose our defenses. And I think that the ultimate task is to lose those defenses, but with wisdom. To be able to operate, because we need an ego to operate in the world, to function in the world. We need an ego, I think.
As our buddy Jesus said, be as innocent as a dove and wary as a serpent.
Yeah, yeah. Well said, Brother Jesus.
I might like it to be expanded rather than
Expand
get rid
what?
of the ego, rather than get rid of. And maybe annihilation would be some of the hardened arteries and walls that get in the way of expanding.
Well, here's a thing I'd like to suggest, that in safe circumstances, for example, in prayer or in meditation, or when you're in a room by yourself, you're meditating, or you're in a safe community of people, of seekers who are also seeking the divine, or seeking the loss of self, to lose the self completely for a little while.
Wow.
Just to have the taste of it, to have the sense of it, to understand the reality of it, but then be able to come back and again
I like
function
that.
in the world.
I mean, I picked a passage where, for my show, which we didn't get to this passage, where Jesus says, "Did you visit me when I was in prison? Did you feed me when I was hungry? Did you clothe me when I was naked?" And his students said, "We never saw you naked or without clothes or in prison." And Jesus says, "Anytime anyone is in prison, that's me. Anyone naked, that's me."
And that's related directly to the idea of love your neighbor as yourself. Because if you truly love your neighbor as yourself and see no distinction
Yeah.
between your neighbor and yourself, then what is good for your neighbor is good for you and vice versa.
Challenging. One of my neighbors, I want to write in the morning and she wants to talk. What do I do in that circumstance?
Great question. I'm not sure I have the answer, but
I think
so on one hand, there's what you want to do, which is to write, and something that you're committed to doing. It's a discipline.
yes.
It is, I would even say, a spiritual discipline.
Yes.
And on the other hand, your neighbor would like to talk and would benefit from that talking, would be comforted by that talking.
And feel loved if I said, "Okay, I'll spend some time."
So it might have been Saint Teresa of Avila who said something like, if you're in the middle of the ecstatic embrace of God, I'm totally paraphrasing. If you're in the middle of the ecstatic embrace of God and somebody needs help, it's like you drop the God part and you go to help the person. So that's one person's
Yeah.
answer to your question.
I'm beginning. I did see her for a while.
Who was Saint Teresa of
Not
Avila?
my neighbor.
Okay.
This morning, and I was mixed, but it had its own charm. Negotiating how long we'd be together, I had a time limit on it, so that was a compromise.
Yeah.
So it was very hard to love my neighbor as myself. Does that mean all of her desires and needs are like my desires and needs?
I can't answer your question, but I can say that Jesus demonstrated at the Last Supper the ritual of washing the disciples' feet, basically saying, if you want to be first, you got to be last. If you want that it is through service to others that you will be, I don't have the language for it, but service to others is the path, the way.
Yeah, I tried that in my 20s, and it really did me in. I had a teacher who said, "You're trying to give yourself to others and you don't have yourself. So there's nothing you're really giving."
Well, again, I don't have answers, but all I'm doing is exploring with you
Yes.
what this might mean and what the annihilation or loss of the ego might be. What seems true to me is that there are moments of grace that come where there is a loosening of the white knuckle grip that ego has on its likes and its dislikes, on its hates and its loves.
Yes.
There's a loosening of it that allows us to do something for someone else in grace, do something for someone else in a graceful way. And it might be a tiny thing or it might be a large thing.
Do we give all our money? Do we sell all we have and give to the poor?
Well, that's what Jesus tells us in the Gospels.
And
And-
does.
And St. Francis was like probably the ultimate practitioner of that, giving away all of his fortune that was due to him from his father, and donning a cassock and going out and begging for food and living on the streets, living as a homeless
Did
person.
you know that the next generation of his followers were into riotous living?
Okay, I've not heard that before,
Yeah.
so I am going to take that with a grain of salt.
Okay.
Um,
Bertrand Russell said it.
Bertrand Russell said it?
Yeah.
Was he there?
He was actually one of the second generation Franciscans.
Yeah, bogus. Bogus. So anyway, where I can go with you on that is that we have had many spiritual teachers over time, and their students have taken their messages and gone all kinds of different directions
So it's
with them.
I don't know the answer to this. I love the negotiation process of discovering what we can do to help. Although there's so much help that's needed, right? If we had no money and no possessions, it might be easier in a way, yes? But we wouldn't have much to give them in some ways.
This much I think that I can say for sure, that if we have no money and possessions, then everything comes as a gift. Every quarter, every hamburger,
Yeah, Buddhist monks live this way. Yes.
and people who live as homeless people on the streets live this way too. That everything is a gift. And people in circumstances like that cannot puff themselves up and say, like so many of our billionaires might say, well, I pulled myself up by my bootstraps and I built this financial empire. And people who have nothing can't say that. And so everything comes as a gift. So when Jesus was saying, blessed are the poor in spirit, they are blessed because they are constantly receiving the gift of, everything is a gift.
And the Franciscans.
If you have nothing, then everything is a gift.
And the Franciscans live this way. They beg
Used to. Used to. I mean, Franciscans these days live in community. I think it's rare that there are a few, I think, that live, in the ultimate poverty, live among the poorest of the poor. Actually, just yesterday, I discovered in Brockton a Franciscan chapel. Had never heard about. The way it came about, I was at Westgate Mall, outside of Brockton, the home of Rocky Marciano, and still a tough town. But anyway, I was outside. I was just come out of Staples, the office superstore in Westgate Mall, and I was sitting in my car, and I heard what sounded like bells. And I'm looking around. I'm in the middle of a mall, and bells. And the more I hear it, the more they sound like church bells. I can't see a church. All I see is like stores everywhere. And so I get in my car and I follow the sound of the bells. And eventually I come to this tiny chapel right at the edge of the mall. That is it's a Franciscan chapel. There are Franciscan brothers that run it. The Franciscans of the Atonement. The Franciscan Friars of the Atonement. And lo and behold, they had a mass in a little while, so I hung around and I went to the mass. But the whole mission, I found out, I hadn't heard of the Franciscan Brothers of the Atonement before, but the whole mission I learned was to take Christ to the marketplace. And so that's why they were situated right at the periphery of Westgate Mall in Brockton. So that was a cool discovery, and I was pleased to make their acquaintance and go to mass there. So what was the point? Oh, so they were not living in destitution as Francis himself did, But they are carrying on the Franciscan spirit by living in community, and they do take a vow of poverty, chastity, and obedience,
Wow.
so that
Wow.
they have very little in the way of money. Anyway, I guess that was a little sidebar.
Well, no, that was connected to annihilation and ego, though. If you have no...
Here's, I'm very interested in the word that you use, annihilation, because before I heard it from you, and before I learned of Fana from you, in my own prayer life, the word would often arise within me when I was in prayer, when I was deep in prayer, and feeling the presence, feeling the beloved presence of God, of holiness, of beauty, of love, then I desired to be annihilated into that. And in that recognition, in recognizing my desire for annihilation, to die, if you will, in the arms of Christ, or die on the arms of the cross, I understood the power of the symbol of Jesus on the cross. That it's the crucifixion of that what is annihilated on the cross is the ego, is the self. And we can practice that in our daily lives. I mean, all of us, as we live day to day, will face little sufferings here and there, whether it be like slow traffic, or it'll be can't find a parking place. I mean, there can be all kinds of little obstacles and pains in the butt that are going to come our ways. And these are opportunities to die a little bit. To die a little bit.
Sounds like a song, Michael.
For a better writer than me, yeah.
Die a little bit. Wow.
Well, yeah. You're a jingle writer. Come up with something in the 3 minutes we have remaining.
I can see you.
I'm gonna die a little bit. I'm gonna die a little bit. Gonna sit in traffic all day. Can't find a parking place. I'm gonna die a little bit. Yeah, I'm gonna die a little bit.
Die, die, die a little bit
Today.
today.
Anyway.
Wow. And rebirth, of course.
Of course. Now that's the trust. And as we know, in all of the ways, as we look back on our lives, in all of the ways that we have died, whether some part of us has died, something that we have lost, we have risen again in this life from that loss, from that grief, from that sorrow, from that suffering.
If we're just present to each other now, if we're not looking directly at each other, I'm looking at you.
Yeah.
Something happened, especially if I take you in and don't have what you said, or those shields.
The boundaries, the layers.
Yes. Whoa. To really just breathe you in is...
Can you do that at will? Because it seems to me that's the ultimate. I mean, if you can breathe in that defenselessness at will.
Be like the child, right?
Yeah. And then, put the shields up when you need to
When
go
needed, yes.
back into the marketplace and
Yeah.
haggle for some goods.
Unless there's a St. Francis Chapel on the corner of the marketplace.
So it seems like that's the ultimate, is to have the facility to move back and forth between these two ways of being. To be the childlike, defenseless, fully feeling, fully present, fully
Wow.
aware self, and the part of us that can move into like negotiation mode and
Innocent as a dove, wary as a serpent.
yeah. So it seems like that might be the ideal.
And it could be happening more and more of the time.
I would like to think that it is.
It's the nature of things to be, if we're not too protected, to be transformed by what we're experiencing.
If our defenses are down, we're going to die a little bit.
Yeah. And be reborn a little bit.
I mean, the whole idea that the creation of defenses, and we've got 30 seconds left, the creation of defenses, we learned in our, as a young person, as a teenager, it's like, well, I'm not going to let that hurt me anymore. I'm putting up a shield, I'm putting up a shield, I'm putting up a shield. And before you know it, we're surrounded, we're choking, suffocating inside all of our shields. Anyway, there's a tiny bit of an attempt at wisdom from the God Talk guys here on Cambridge Community Access Television. With 10 seconds left, what do you got for our audience?
Gonna lay down my
And
sword
die
and
a little
shield
bit.
down by the riverside.
See you next time.
Wow. I put that one